Hello, I'm Alan, and welcome to today's edition of Alan's Cycling Adventures. There's 2 weeks left to go before the Twin Lights ride, and my training plan calls for a 75-mile ride today and next Sunday. So that's what we're going to do today. It's actually going to probably be more like 78 miles, I think, is what the course turned out to be. In any event, today's ride is going to do double duty because that also is over 100 kilometers. And I've been doing the metric century a month challenge since January. So today's ride is also going to count as my metric century for the month of September. If you enjoy my video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Click the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or ideas for future editions of Alan's Cycling Adventures, be sure to leave them in the comments below. Well, without further ado, let's ride. I have ridden this route before, twice before, and I have to admit I always get a little intimidated by it when I do. That's because the first time I rode this route, I got badly dehydrated. That was the ride where I got rescued by a fellow cyclist who brought me water and apples and electrolyte powder. However, I don't know if I had left the aftermath of that ride in the voiceover when I videotaped it. Basically what happened was, after the ride, as I often do after a long ride, I laid down on my bed to rest for a little while. Except this time I woke up about an hour later with my legs seizing up with horrible, painful cramps. And every time I tried to get out of bed, my legs would seize up. I even tried to stumble out of bed, and that was excruciatingly painful. And I was able to get back into bed and just lay there, where I laid for probably about an hour or two before I was ultimately able to finally get up and get some water in me and move about, walk it off basically. But at one point I was actually considering calling the first aid squad because I was afraid that I might need an IV because of the dehydration. The second time that I rode the route, I didn't get quite so dehydrated. I carried a lot more stuff with me, a lot more water, some electrolyte tablets, extra gels. So I was better prepared, and it wasn't like 95 degrees or something like it was the first time I rode the route. And so I survived the second attempt much better. But this ride also has some serious climbs on it, and that adds to my trepidation over going on this route. But as I say at the end, I did survive it, and so I'm happy with that. I also had a technical issue along the ride. My GPS rebooted, and so I ended up saving the ride in 2 segments on Strava. And so Strava did not give me credit for completing a metric century, which was a little of a bummer, but I'm riding the same route again next week, so I'll get my credit for it from Strava at that time. And I am claiming credit for completing the metric century because this ride was over 100 kilometers. In terms of the statistics for this ride, the temperature at the start was 71 degrees Fahrenheit with the wind out of the southwest at 3 miles per hour. By the end of the ride, the wind had picked up to 5 miles per hour, so not much, and the temperature increased to 88 degrees Fahrenheit. The distance for today's ride was 78.44 miles with an elevation gain of 3,799 feet. There were 5 main climbs on today's ride. The first one was 0.88 miles in length with an elevation gain of 138 feet and an average gradient of 2%. The second and third climbs actually came in a segment of about 5 miles of continuous climbing. But the second one was 0.55 miles in length with an elevation gain of 174 feet and an average gradient of 6%. Then I had maybe half a mile of a lesser gradient before going into the third climb, which was 0.91 miles in length with an elevation gain of 338 feet and an average gradient of 7%. After that, when I finally got to the top of that long climb, there was a nice downhill stretch and some rolling hills before coming down a hill and around a turn onto the fourth climb of the day. If you're watching the video, you'll know when I get to it because I actually dropped my chain trying to downshift at the start of the climb and had to flip my bike over to get the chain back on. In any event, that climb was 0.71 miles in length with an elevation gain of 266 feet and an average gradient of 7%. Then I had about 20 miles before I got to another climb. The last two climbs were close to each other, but not on a continuous climb. The fifth climb of the day was 1.31 miles in length with an elevation gain of 210 feet and an average gradient of 3%. And the sixth climb of the day was the climb into summit that I've done before. That's the one where the last third or last half of it ramps up considerably steeper than the rest of it. But Garmin has it listed as 0.44 miles in length with an elevation gain of 148 feet and an average gradient of 6%. In terms of my average moving speed on today's route, I actually had to add up the distances and add up the moving time and divide it myself to come up with an average speed because of the fact that the GPS rebooted and I saved it in two segments. The average speed was 15.7 miles per hour. My maximum speed was 36 miles per hour. My average heart rate was 132 with a max heart rate of 154. And I burned a total of 2,052 calories according to Strava and had an average power output of 132 watts. In terms of where I rode, the entire ride was in the state of New Jersey. I started out in Garwood, rode into Westfield, Springfield, Millburn, then up through the South Mountain Reservation into West Orange, Verona, Cedar Grove, North Caldwell, Wayne, Lincoln Park, Pequannock Township, Pompton Plains, Riverdale, actually right past the Riverdale National Guard Armory, which I know well, but that's a story for another day, but that goes back to when I served in the National Guard. Then into Bloomingdale, Butler, then a trip through the Northern Green State Forest, which was where that 5-mile continuous climb was, and into Macoupin, Kinnelon, Boonton Township, Denville, which was the scene of where the GPS rebooted, Morris Plains, Morristown, Morris Township, Madison, Chatham, Summit, Mountainside, Westfield, and back into Garwood. I did have an interesting experience on today's ride, which was not a long ride, and so I didn't record it. But at one point I was changing screens on the GPS, and while changing to the screen I wanted, my thumb hit the start-stop button, and it prompted me if I wanted to save the ride. Much like it does when the GPS reboots. After I got mad at myself for hitting that button, I thought, let me try hitting the button again and see what happens. And I did, and it restarted recording the ride. And I'm happy to report that when I got home and it uploaded to Strava, it recorded as one continuous ride. And so if I do encounter a GPS reboot again, I'll still pull over and wait for it to finish rebooting. But instead of hitting save ride, I'm going to hit the start-stop button and see if it restarts the ride. That would be pretty nice, so that I don't end up with two separate rides, which is really annoying when it's on one of my events or a long ride that I'm recording or a metric century like today. So maybe it is salvageable when the GPS reboots. In any event, it looks like I'm in Summit at this point. So I'm getting close to the end of the ride. And so I'm just going to turn you over to the video. See you at the end.
Well, that was a success. There's something about that route that intimidates me a little bit. I guess it's because that's the route where I got dehydrated and cramped up back in May. You may remember when I was preparing for the Gran Fondo Hincapi. But I survived the route. There's some killer climbs on it, and killed two birds with one stone. I got my 75-mile training ride in, and I got my metric century in for the month of September. So I'd say it was a success. Well, until next time, stay safe out there.